Welcome to the first ever pilot episode of the Scramble podcast, along with Chris Flynn. I am Paul Hollingsworth. Chris, I'm in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Where are you coming from?
I'm on Long Lake in Mayo, Quebec, Paul. It's about 40 minutes from Ottawa. It's where my mom grew up. It's real kind of cottage country here. It's a real community back here, I guess you could say. And then we have our Long Lake Regatta that goes on in the summertime, and then in the wintertime we have my skating rink just out here. The reason I'm mentioning this stuff is because when we're finished our hockey games, we come in here to my little bar in my basement. It's not a real bar. It's just my home bar. My cousin Brandon Lalone said, "Oh, we should give it a name." He called it Shenanigans, and that was about 10 years ago. The name kind of stuck. So around here, we affectionately call my little sports pub in my basement here Shenanigans. So that's where I am at this moment.
Well, we hope to get involved in some shenanigans going forward. Just to give listeners a bit of background on this, Chris, of course, is a three-time Heck Crichton Award winner. Perhaps arguably the greatest university football player in the history of the country, certainly one of the best all-time, an all-time Husky. His number was retired, led the Huskies to two Vanier Cup appearances. One of those times, of course, he was injured. He played a lot of football after he left St. Mary's. He's kept close roots to the city, kept close roots to the university. And of course, that's where I come in because, Chris, you and I have many friendships that overlap in our fellow St. Mary's alum world that we live in. And through our conversations and through our shared experiences, mine's not coming from shenanigans, mine's coming from my host, but we are joining forces here to launch this podcast. And tonight is the first episode to give our listeners just a sample of what we hope to do going forward.
Absolutely. And the podcast, for myself, I did a few podcasts, got interviewed by a few people, and just recently an old teammate of mine, Gilbert Ansaw, a friend of mine, an old teammate from Champlain Cougars, interviewed me. And after the podcast was over, he was kind of like, "Chris, you should do your own podcast." And I kind of thought about it a little bit and said, "Yeah, I might look into that." Then went to St. Mary's homecoming, of course, last month, and ran into a bunch of the guys, including yourself, Paul, and we started talking about it. And really, with my sports background and with your sports and TV background, is like, hey, maybe we could make a pretty good team doing this. And yeah, here we are today doing our first pilot.
We kicked around the name. I looked to my left, and we thought maybe the Chris Flynn podcast. We looked to the right, and a friend of ours, Stephen Patterson, came up with the name the Scramble podcast. We're calling it the Scramble for obvious reasons, because when you played football, you were known for
scrambling. And I guess you've been scrambling all over the world doing your thing too with CTV and TSN. So it's seemed like a good name.
If I would allow us, I don't have a whole lot in sports in common with you. You're a whole stratosphere ahead of me, but I think we both have a reputation for hustling and scrambling around, achieving what we've achieved in our lifetime. So we certainly have that in common. Let's spend the next couple of minutes before we wrap this up. This is a short snapper of a podcast to introduce our format to people going ahead. We want to tell stories. We want to share stories. We want to share your stories, Chris. We want to share my stories that connect to current and past sports experiences. And we should also mention we want to interview people on this podcast. It will be you, me, and one or two other people through the format, not just football, hockey, baseball, basketball, administrative positions, but basically, and you feel free to agree and weigh in on this, but we want to do a deep dive into sports culture at this time and tell some stories along the way.
Whether it's university athletes, current or past, or professional athletes, and not just in football and hockey, but in all sports. And even here, sometimes having a few of my local friends in the bar talking about the current affairs of the Ottawa Senators or the Toronto Maple Leafs, talking to some Leafs fans one night kind of thing. So having a few guests here, a few at your place too. And like we said, even traveling a little bit, maybe St. Mary's homecoming, doing a podcast right there on site sort of thing. So most of the time it'll be me here and you in Halifax, but we might even move around sometimes too. So I think we're going to have some really pretty cool guests, and people are going to enjoy it.
And we should also mention that We both have strong connections to the Halifax area. We both have very strong connections. Both of us are proud alum and members of the St. Mary's alumni, and we wear that like a badge of honor. So those experiences will be foundational to what we do, but that will just be that, foundational. We plan on telling broader stories and sharing broader themes, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, won't be just football, or won't be just in kind of definitely. We're both have our ties to Halifax and St. Mary's, but this is going to be definitely a broad view of whether it's the NFL game that's going on tonight. With we're going to be talking NFL, NHL, and all kinds of sports with all kinds of different levels of athletes. So it's going to be awesome.
And before we wrap this up, we should also mention, as we go forward, we're going to brand this thing properly. We want to engage in partnerships to help us grow. We want to be active on social media. That would be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, maybe Snapchat. It's not necessarily my demographic, but I know some young people who could help us out with that. But we want to basically reach wide for a broad range of audience and try to grow this thing responsibly and at a good pace, but also at an exciting pace.
I agree 100%. And with your kind of expertise on the TV end and the sports end, and we will both bring some different kind of guests on too, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, I'll tell you what, Chris, we always feel blessed. I know I do, and I know you do as well. We've had good lives between us, great experiences. And from that, it's the opportunity to build on our friendship, build on our experiences, share some of the stories we've come across over the years, and share with our audience some of the people we plan on meeting along the way. It is the Scramble podcast. Chris Flynn in beautiful Quebec, Paul Hollingsworth here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. We are excited to get this thing off the ground. The pilot episode is now in the books, and we look forward to episode number 2. We'll see you soon.